prematurely, a mistake that beginners often make. Watch out for such clues, recognize them, and use them to your benefit. But also be aware that your opponents will deliberately try to mislead you. Don't let yourself be distracted, misled, or even seduced into performing an action. That's what lovely Lucy did with Giovanni, and he fell for her trick. Lucy managed to cajole Giovanni into checking instead of betting, even though he had a good hand. By doing this, Lucy saved money and got the showdown for free. Don't let this happen to you. Sometimes an opponent will challenge, provoke, or aggravate you with the intent of prompting a certain reaction, as Johnny did with Rudiger. Self-discipline and body control can and must be trained in order to be successful at poker. Poker time! What does position play mean in Texas Hold'em? The closer you are to the dealer button, the better your position is. Why? Obviously, you can observe the actions of all your fellow players and you can adjust yourself and your starting hand, meaning your hold cards accordingly. Make use of this advantage to the fullest. In principle, there are 3 distinct positions. The early position, the first 3 places to the left of the dealer button, where only the best starting hand should be played, as you can see in this illustration. Then there's the middle position, that's seat numbers 4, 5 and 6 to the left of the dealer button. Here you can play additional card combinations compared to the previous ones. And finally the late position, seats 7, 8 and 9 left of the dealer button. Here you can play various starting hands, depending on whether a player before you has raised or not. The further back you're seated, the more starting hands you'll be able to play, since the chance of someone raising after that becomes slimmer. So play aggressively in order to protect a good hand, and don't give your opponents the opportunity to see the flop with a weak hand, since that can lead to unpleasant surprises. Back to our first example. In this game, Rudiger had a queen of diamonds and a 10 of diamonds, and he made several mistakes all at once. He is seated in the best position on the dealer button, but he didn't use that to his advantage. He played much too passively. Even at the flop, he held a pair of queens, the highest pair possible. He could have or even should have raised, but instead he only called. After that, his hand became weaker and weaker, and then instead of folding, he called up to the showdown, even though many cards would already have been stronger than his. The same thing happened in game number 7. Rudiger left the game after playing passively before the flop. A strong hand should be protected by raising, especially in the first round of betting. Again, don't forget, exploit your position, but avoid getting into a calling station, simply paying and observing. Often a raise is much more effective than a call. Poker time! The pot odds are, for many pros and especially in online games, the most important tool in poker. I now want to explain the mathematical pot odds for you by way of a simple example. In game number 3, there was a situation in which the probabilities were decisive for the following actions. It's after the turn, and Johnny has the king and queen of hearts. His opponent, in this case that's me, has now raised to 1,000. Now it's Johnny's turn again, and he's calculating the pot odds for himself to figure out if he should pay or not. Let's help him to figure it out. There is 3,900 in the pot. That's the sum of all the bets. 1,900 is already in the pot. 500 from Johnny, 500 from Rudiger, and my raise to 1,000 for a sum total of 3,900. Johnny would now have to pay an additional 500. That means potentially he could earn 3,900 for his stake, or in other words, 7.8 times his stake. By contrast, he now has 12 cards, or 12 outs, with which he can win. This is calculated as follows. He has a 9 of hearts for a flush, or 3 jacks for a straight. There are 46 unknown cards remaining, because a complete deck of 52 cards, minus the 2 whole cards, minus the 3 cards from the flop, and minus the turn, leaves 46. Thus, the odds are 12 out of 46, or, put more differently, 1 to 3.8. Now, let's add these two sums together, 3.8 and 7.8. It's easy to explain. He wins the pot once every 3.8 times, and would win 7.8 times his stake each time. This is clearly a situation for a good call. Poker time! In addition, I'd like to illustrate a few more game tips and moves, betting strategies that will enable you to gain more chips from your opponents. First, the check raise. This is often best used against aggressive players. But watch out! It can happen that your fellow player will also check and you will gain nothing. Slow play. This means playing a very strong hand passively, betting small amounts and checking so as not to give away your hand and to fool the others. This is quite risky since players with low stakes get to see many more cards. Hence my tip, only to use this with a very strong hand such as a full house or a high flush. Bluffing. A well-known and popular expression and game move. Several components have to come together for bluffing to succeed. The pot should not be too large. You should have enough chips to be able to exert enough pressure. You should know your fellow players, and you should pay attention to their chip stacks. So don't bluff too much at the beginning. And finally, the stop raise. With this move, you make use of a better position, as you sit behind your fellow players and watch their moves. Often you will make this move in case of a draw, that is a potential flush or a potential straight, to get a river without paying for it. Here we have an example. Your cards are King and Queen of Spades, and the flop yields the 3 of Spades, the Ace of Hearts, and the 7 of Spades. You now have 4 spades and hence a potential flush. Your opponent now places a bet before you, let's say 100. And now instead of just calling, you raise to 300. Perhaps you will already win the pot at this point, if your opponent doesn't have a good hand. And if he does, as in our example, he will match the bet and call. The turn then yields the 9 of diamonds, which doesn't help you, but your opponent is now mindful of you, since you previously raised and checks. After your own hand has not improved, you also check, and thus you get the last card, the river, for free. And that brings us to the end of our poker DVD. I hope you've learned a thing or two, and that you had as much fun as we did. And who knows, maybe one day we'll meet at a poker table. Until then, goodbye, and good luck.
Face the poker challenge. BWin.